I think we're good to go, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone to this public meeting, which unfortunately cannot be held as I would have liked face to face. On this first anniversary of COVID lockdown, certainly the longest year I can remember, I'd like just to remember residents, families and friends who've lost loved ones during this very difficult year. The many special characters who gave so much to this unique town of Faversham. We remember them and we miss them. Tonight is an opportunity for residents to ask questions in a polite manner, kind manner, hopefully, calm some of your worries and concerns, which I'm sure you have. Whenever change occurs, there is always apprehension and sometimes opposition. So hopefully we can discuss and possibly resolve some of the genuine worries. You will be asked to state your name and address and allowed 2 minutes for your question. If time runs out, please forward your question to Swale Borough Council or the Town Council. Please can I ask that you do not repeat a question that somebody has already asked. Firstly, I would like to invite Councillor John Irwin, Chair of Faversham's Neighbourhood Plan, also Councillor Chris Barker, Vice Chair. I'm hoping they will speak on our neighbourhood plan before introducing Chief Executive from Swale Borough Council, Larissa Reid, and James Freeman, Head of Planning, to answer questions on the 1,000-page local plan document. So, Councillor Irwin, if I can call you in now.
You're on mute, Councillor Irwin.
Okay, we're good to go.
Yes, thank you.
I do apologise. I think I'd got the hang of this by now, but so just thank you, Madam Mayor, for giving me a few minutes at the start of this meeting. Obviously, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions and voice opinions on the emerging Swale local plan. And, you know, the way Faversham is being developed and will be developed in the future is of significant interest and concern to many of our residents and businesses. And I think this concern has long been recognised by Faversham Town Council. What I'd like to talk about very briefly is the Faversham Neighbourhood Plan. The Faversham Neighbourhood Plan is being developed in parallel to the local plan. It's been developed by the Town Council and also ably supported by numerous community volunteers. And this process started in January of 2020. This plan will go out for consultation later this year and will be presented to the people of Faversham in a referendum next year in 2022. What I'd like to do, however, before we start talking about the Swale local plan, are draw some distinctions between the Swale local plan and Faversham Neighbourhood Plan. The Faversham Neighbourhood Plan is developed by Faversham residents for Faversham residents. It's a plan which applies in scope to the town and port of Faversham. I would be very surprised if this evening much of the discussion is around housing allocation. Just to make it clear, volume housing allocations are made by Swale Borough Council in line with house building targets issued by central government. The Neighbourhood Planning Group do not set the borough's housing targets, nor do they determine where the houses go. The Neighbourhood Plan can, however, ensure that developers give us the housing we need. They can make sure we get the right mix of housing in terms of size. Much of the criticism in the past is that developers are hell-bent on developing 5-bedroom executive homes, when in fact what we need are starter homes. We need homes for people who are downsizing. We need homes for the elderly and disabled. It'll also help us drive a mixture of tenure, both in terms of private rental, rental through housing associations, as well as affordable housing and housing at market value. Also, it'll mean that things like affordable housing are fully integrated into new developments and will be standalone social housing action. It'll enable us to demand improved workplaces, community infrastructure, schools, which will no doubt come up this evening, transport, shops, sports, leisure facilities, etc. It'll help us identify additional local green spaces we want to protect. It'll help us ensure we get good footpaths and cycle lanes, safe streets and road crossings. It's therefore critical that the community work to influence the future of development of the town. And I would encourage everyone, irrespective of their views of the Swale local plan, to engage with, influence, get involved with the Faversham neighbourhood plan, because it's our town's opportunity to influence the housing that no doubt will come to Faversham over the future. I'd like to hand to Councillor Chris Barker, who will just tell you a little bit about how this evening will work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Irwin. Just one minor correction. I'm not the Vice Chair of the Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group.
No, you're right.
Wade, who has done a fantastic job helping us, along with many other members of the community, produce what is a huge body of evidence to support our neighbourhood plans. I'd like to thank Jeff and the rest of the volunteers in their support. A couple of notes on the local plan as well. As John described, the housing allocations are created by Swale Borough Council, and in fact the strategy for where allocations go reside with the councillors at Swale Borough Council. We've been really lucky to, I think, have Larissa Reid and James Freeman attend this session for us tonight. But we must remember that they are officers. Their role is to carry out and deliver the wishes of the councillors for Swale Borough Council. And as such, they should be treated with respect for talking through a plan that they deliver, but ultimately aren't responsible for how it's created and what the policies within that is shaped very much by the councillors and not the officers. So please treat Larissa and James with respect. As Madam Mayor said, we have a lot of people will have an emotional response to change, and especially such dramatic change as we respectively have with the local plan. As I like to reiterate that I'd like people to remain calm, controlled and civil at all times. Not only does it help accentuate your point, but it also helps us record your feelings more constructively as well. The objective of this call is that Faversham residents, and solely Faversham residents, can provide feedback and seek clarity where they feel there is confusion potentially within that local plan document from the officers at Swale. As such, what I would like to do is, if you have a question to ask the officers, can I please ask that you submit your name and address followed by the question, or just your name and address is fine, and then we will refer the question to you and I will manage the order in which those questions are addressed to the officers. It's really important that we get your name and address so that we can identify that you are part of Faversham Parish. It's not that we wish to exclude people outside the parish from this process, but James and Larissa and the rest of the planning team have done a good job of attending other parishes and supporting them. And you can, of course, outside of Faversham Town, go directly to Swale to engage them and on the consultation. So we're really looking just to understand the feelings and views of our residents and take those into account in Faversham Town Council's response to this local plan consultation. So if you could, the chat is activated by mostly at the bottom of applications, certainly on computers. At the bottom, you will see a little speech bubble with chat beneath it. If you press that, a chat window should open on your viewing pane, and you can type in a message down the bottom right. So if you just put your name and address, and then I will call you in order to ask questions. You'll be allowed 2 minutes. We have, at last count, I saw 50+ members of the public, and probably don't have time enough to address each of the questions and thoughts within that. And so I would suggest you please maintain a strict code of 2 minutes. I would If I feel that you need hurrying up, I'll interject at some stage. But hopefully you can control your own 2 minutes worth of allocated time. As Madam Mayor said, it'd be great to avoid repetition. So where you agree with a former person's point, I think it is valuable to say that you agree. If you agree that somebody dislikes the volume of housing or the location or something to do with the environment, if you disagree with something or agree with a former member and what they've said, please say that you echo those thoughts, but do not repeat them. Add something new and distinct, or just say that you echo them and that's enough. That's a fine enough statement to make. And then we can control the flow of debate and count the kind of views independently. Last but not least, as we've said before, keep it civil. If I find that people are raising their voice or being offensive, I will remove you and mute you. I don't want to do that, and I really hope I don't do that. And I'm honestly hopeful that I won't need to. But please keep it civil. Thank you for listening to me. The councillors can take questions as well. We are here in listening mode, and we do have our own thoughts, and we do have thoughts as a council towards the local plan, but it really is about listening to residents at the moment tonight. I'll now hand on to Larissa Reid, CEO, and James Freeman, Head of Planning at Swale. They'll do an introduction to the plan and then we'll start to take questions, but please feel free to start putting your names and questions forward now.
So thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Chris. My name is Larissa Reid. I am Chief Executive of Swale Borough Council, and I have been the Chief Executive for about 11 weeks. So I'm quite new to the Swale Borough Council, but was born and brought up in Faversham, went to school in Faversham, have never really left Faversham and the surrounding villages, even though I worked away. I think my family, Mayor Spillett, many decades ago, was my great-great-great-grandfather, and he was the mayor of Faversham. So Faversham really is in my bones. My mum would say it's where my roots are.
Yeah.
But my job here tonight, and our job here tonight, isn't to say to you and to get you to think that the local plan is the best thing. That's really up to you to think. I'm not a planning expert. I've brought James along with me. James is a planning expert. And the thing about tonight is to explain how we've got to where we've got to on our local plan, and to be able to be in a position that we're certain that you understand how we've got to where we've got. Not saying that you have to agree with it, but then that you know exactly how you can respond to the Reg 19 consultation. And the Reg 19 consultation is a really important piece of consultation, because by commenting on the Reg 19 consultation, it means that you're able to comment further down the line if this goes to planning inquiry. It's not a done deal. Nothing is a done deal. We wouldn't be here if we thought things were a done deal. But what we do know is that things have to be changed on grounds of planning grounds, rather than grounds of actually, could you just move these 12 houses and put them somewhere else, or these 100 houses or whatever. So we know that for a lot of people, and I think both Madam Mayor and Chris said, emotions run high. I think if you were to talk to most of our, if not all of our councillors and our MPs, they will tell you that there are too many houses planned for the South East, in Kent in particular. In a meeting I was at yesterday, I was told that all of the Kent MPs had written to the government to say there shouldn't be that many houses here, but we know that that's a figure we have to meet. So none of us are saying that we think this is easy. There's some very difficult decisions we have to make, but we're here to listen to what you have to say, but also to ensure that you understand how we've got to where we've got to. So I'm just going to pass over to James Freeman, who's our Head of Planning, to just give a brief overview of the plan and how we've got here.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. And you've noticed my name is Siobhan on the on this. That's apologies for that. I'm having to use new technology in the house because our systems are down at Swale, I think, and I've used our home laptop, and hence the name. So apologies for that. I am the Head of Planning at Swale Borough Council, and I noticed Councillor Gould is here as well, who's the Deputy Cabinet Member for Planning. So he may wish to help me out as he wishes to do so. I thought I would just take a few minutes to explain why we are preparing a review of the local plan, what it involves, what are the proposals for Faversham, and a bit about the development management policies as well, which are contained in the plan. So first of all, what is the local plan and what does it do? Preparing a local plan is one of local government's statutory functions. It is ultimately a policy framework that sets out what our development needs are, and that includes the needs for infrastructure. And it needs to accord with a standardised process set by the government, and it must accord to national planning policy as well, which is through the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, local plans are at the heart of the plan-led system. They are an opportunity to shape development, and planning law requires planning decisions to be taken in accordance with the development plan, which includes the local plan itself. Now, it's aimed there to provide certainty both for developers and importantly for communities where the required growth is going to take place. Local plans need to be up to date. If they are more than 5 years old, they are then considered out of date by the government, and planning decisions would then be determined on National Planning Policy Framework alone and not through the local plan. And a current adopted local plan, it's 5 years, comes to an end around about March, April 2022, hence the necessary speed in which to come forward with the new local plan. Now, how are local plans prepared? There are 5 stages. First stage is the evidence gathering and engagement. Then when you move on to what's called an issues and options Regulation 18 consultation, which we carried out in 2018. And this has led to the preferred option draft plan Regulation 19 consultation. And that's the stage we've reached now. Following this, if the plan moves forward, there will be a formal submission to the Secretary of State, who then proceeds to set up an examination which is held by an independent planning inspector. And then finally, the inspector reports to the council, and the council goes through a final adoption stage of the local plan itself. As I said, we're at Regulation 19 stage. This is the formal consultation. Normally we would look for a minimum of 6 weeks, but as you're aware, the council has extended that consultation period to 10 weeks up to the 30th of April. The formal requirement is for representations to be made commenting on the soundness of the local plan. And that's based on 4 tests. The first test, is the plan positively prepared, i.e. are we meeting the development needs of the borough? Second one, is it justified, i.e. do we have the evidence to support the approach put forward in the plan? Thirdly, is it effective, i.e. will it be able to deliver the policies and proposals contained in the plan? And lastly, is it consistent with national policy? Now the plan period for the review is between 2022 and 2038. So it's a 16-year plan. For the housing number, which is obviously quite sensitive out there, the government requires local planning authorities to use their standard method for calculating housing need. For Swale and the local plan review, this figure is 1,038 dwellings per annum. And if you multiply that over the 16-year period, that requires 16,608 dwellings to be provided for within Swale Borough itself. Now, we already have 7,000 dwellings identified during the plan period in the current adopted local plan, where sites are being carried forward. Therefore, we've had to provide for an additional new allocation and land for additional dwellings of around about 10,000 new homes. Now, the broad strategy in the current adopted local plan in bearing fruits focuses the majority of new sites within what is called the Thames Gateway area, focused on Sittingbourne and Sheppey. Now, the broad development strategy included in the local plan review focused more development towards the eastern half of the borough to redress the balance, and to support a more even distribution of the identified growth required for the whole borough. Now I've got a pie chart, and this is going to test my technology. My technology. So if I can share the screen, just bear with me. Can somebody allow me to share the screen? Okay, thank you. Now then, how do I get? Just bear with me a second. This is all a bit. Here we go. Can everybody see? Can somebody just say they can see the slide? Because I've just got the slide in front of me.
No.
James, we can see if you've got an Asus computer, we can. Oh no, we're viewing Adrienne Begent's screen at the moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Adrian, you need to go to security and then tick share screen, allow share screen.
We do think this is worth showing you, so this is why we're asking.
Is it working?
Not there yet.
Do you want to try again, James?
Yeah, just bear with me. Is that working now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, there
Brilliant.
it is.
Yay!
My technological abilities aren't that great, and apologies for that. As you can see, there's 3 pie charts in front of you. Just get me active. Sorry, there are 3 pie charts in front of you, which presents the percentage of total new development. First, if you look at the top left-hand corner, that's the current adopted local plan distribution between Sheppey, Faversham, Sittingbourne and rural areas. And the one below it is the distribution of plan growth purely for the new allocations within the local plan review. And the pie chart on the right-hand side is the combination of the two. So in effect, looking at the figures there, for the distribution at Faversham, you're looking at a percentage increase of 17% in the current adopted plan to 28% as a combined local plan review bearing fruits combination. And it's worth noting that Sittingbourne is taking a reduction from 43% to 32%. So there's a reduction there, but still the largest proportion of development is going to Sittingbourne. And for Sheppey, there's a reduction from 27% to 25%. So it's just showing what the distribution is when you take the allocations which have been brought forward in the local plan and the new local plan review itself. Now we have identified 5 main areas to meet the majority of that need. There's 1,100 dwellings at Tenham through what's called an area of opportunity. There's 850 dwellings within Sittingbourne Town Centre, 850 dwellings at Rushenden South on the island, 90 dwellings at Selling and Neames Forstall, and 3,500 dwellings at south east and east of Faversham. Now, there were a number of sites put forward around Faversham and assessed.
Yeah.
I think we might have lost James.
Availability assessment, and that's available for your context for that.
James,
There's other
we
evidence
lost
and
you.
information in.
James, we lost you. Could you just repeat the bit about we got as far as there were a number of sites and then you froze?
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, phew. Right, there are a number of sites put forward around Faversham and assessed as part of the Strategic Land Availability Assessment. And that's available on our website. If you notice, there is about over 200 sites altogether being put forward. So it's worth looking at. Now, as other evidence and information has emerged over the sites available, the council considered that the area called as East Faversham was the most preferable. We believe it represents an exciting opportunity for investment and regeneration in this area that could benefit both existing and new communities. Now, this area includes land to the north of Graveney Road. I'll just flick onto the plan. Hope that's coming through. Can everybody see the plan?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. So this area includes land to the north of Graveney Road, land at Lady Dane Farm, and land at South East Faversham, which is owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. So what is proposed? In total, the site will accommodate a minimum of 3,340 dwellings with an appropriate mix of type and tenures of affordable housing. It will provide a wide range of employment opportunities, around about 20 hectares, provide a new secondary school, 2 new primary schools, open space, sports provision, and contributions towards healthcare provision, given that the PCT have stated to us that they do not need additional GP practice. Now, due to the scale of development proposed and the need for landowners to work together, a master plan development brief should be prepared and agreed by the council before any planning applications are submitted. This master plan should consider such matters as the phasing of development relative to the transport and other infrastructure improvements, and the need to secure the upgraded wastewater works that will be required as part of the development. It will also need to ensure a coordinated approach in terms of design, in terms of the transport links and communications, etc., community facilities and infrastructure generally, but also focus on the integration of the development with links to Faversham Town Centre, minimise its visual impacts on the surrounding area, and consider its relationship to quite sensitive environmental designations surrounding the site, which both ecological and landscape, and importantly, the relationship with improvements proposed for the M2 Junction 7 at Brinley Corner. There are also a number of other proposed allocations in Faversham, including land at Preston Fields for residential development, and some employment sites which have been rolled forward from the adopted local plan, which haven't been built out yet. The local plan review consultation document also includes new development management policies seeking affordable housing, and that's been set at 30% for the Faversham area. Looking at biodiversity net gain at 20%, that's doubling the requirement that's required through the Environment Bill put forward by the government. It's looking at policies for carbon neutral building, which will be ratcheted up over the lifespan of the plan, and introducing active and sustainable travel measures. And the council's been very promotional of making sure we make the best use of sustainable travel and modal shift, if at all possible, as part of the plan. Now, the consultation ends at 5 p.m. on Friday, the 30th of April, as I mentioned. Now, we recognise that the ask for representations to be made on soundness, the 4 tests I was talking about earlier, can be tricky. I acknowledge that. But you don't have to make your representations using the online consultation portal or comment indeed on the soundness tests. We would be happy to accept representations as long as they're made in writing and received by the closing date. Okay, so what will the council do with the representations once they're received? In theory, we summarise the main issues and submit along with all the other documents to the Secretary of State. In practice, we summarise the main issues and we actually take stock as a council. Our starting point for Regulation 19 plan is that it is sound, but if there are issues raised that need further consideration, then we would need to think about that. Now, the main issues raised in the Regulation 19 consultation tend to form the basis of the discussions at the examination. So it is really in everyone's interest that the council does take stock, and it is serious about taking the representations which are received. We envisage reporting on the main issues to a local plan panel meeting in July later this year, and we would expect, if the council proceeds with the plan, to submit to the Secretary of State later in the autumn. Now that's a quick introduction to me from me, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank
Do you want me to remove the slides?
If you could, please.
If that's possible, yeah.
Great. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you both, James and Larissa, for
Brilliant.
presentation.
Really good.
5 questions, Madam Mayor. The first is from Mike Cosgrove of 22 Ospringe Place. Would you like to?
So, Mr. Cosgrove, if you could come in now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you very much. 3 things, really. Firstly, can I say congratulations to the new Swale Chief Executive, the 9th Swale Chief Executive, and thank you very much to James Freeman for, as usual, a good presentation.
Really good.
It was mentioned the neighbourhood plan. 2 months ago, I produced a book called Bridge of Dreams, which essentially talks about the neighbourhood plan, the old one. So any councillor who would like a copy, please get in touch with me. My question, though, is about the transport strategy. My understanding is that this strategy has not been finalised and will not be reported to the local plan panel until the consultation on the plan is completed. So, and there are a number of assumptions about Junction 7 and the costs of improvement. So I'd be grateful for some clarification about the relationship between the draft transport strategy and this current consultation process.
Thank you very much for your question, Mike, and well within the time, so I really do appreciate that. And can I also ask that we do 2 questions at once, because then it might sort of speed things up ever so slightly. Can I ask that Josh Rowlands also come forward with his question?
Josh Rowlands, if you could come in now.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mine's not so much a question more than a statement. So, Madam Mayor, I first want to thank the officers of Swale who have made the time to speak to us tonight and compiling this massive document that I worry will focus on 8 pages of and not the other 990 odd. I moved to Faversham with my family in 2013 when my dad took the position of the local vicar. Although hesitant at first, I quickly fell in love with this town for its friendliness and community feel. I've worked in this town for many years, serving many of you either a pint of beer or most recently a good old cup of coffee. Last year, I finally managed to find a property to start my own life in Faversham, start my own story, if you will. But like many other people in this town, the house I live in is not my own. I am a member of what has been called Generation Red. I live in this town and one day want to be able to own my own home here. But currently, I'm completely priced out of the market. Now, I completely understand that many people on this call have reservations about the mass housing, the mass house building initiative that is being put forward in this plan. And to be clear, it worries me as well. We need to be clear that public needs exist and that housing should reflect that. However, it should be clear that those needs should reflect the needs of the town and not a government algorithm. Basically, I'm saying that houses should be built in the right places and at the right prices. Some of you in this call pay less monthly for your mortgages than I or others like me pay in rent. I want the opportunity to have a mortgage and have a house of my own. But currently that just is not viable for me because of the lack of affordable housing in Faversham and because my wage is apparently my wage is not enough to actually get a mortgage, but apparently enough to actually get rent for a house, which on average costs more than a mortgage. I mean, go figure that one out.
Yes.
Let's be honest for a minute. Government housing targets are too high and too easy for developers to abuse. It's too easy for developers to get out of building affordable housing on viability grounds. This is what we need to argue and not take away from the fact that the need for affordable housing for people who want to put down roots in this town. Currently, the only routes I can plan is that of the client that lives in the corner of the house that I do not own. I just want to urge the council to respond to this plan carefully and think not only of those that already own homes, but those that actually want to own houses one day in this town as well.
Josh, yeah, I'm conscious that we're coming close to time. Is there anything more you need to add, Josh, or that's
it? That's me.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh.
James, we had a question from Michael Scrove on transport strategy appearing to be absent from the current plan. Could you kind of explain what's happening around that and the transport strategy? And then whilst Josh said he didn't ask a question, he raised two interesting points around housing needs and affordable housing. Could you talk to either of those points, please?
Will do my best. Now there is a draft local transport plan which is running in parallel with the local plan. That document itself is always a live document, and right up to the point actually when we go to examination there can be changes to it. Now that has been drafted on the basis of some preliminary transport modelling which was undertaken in preparation of the plan leading to the Reg 19 consultation, and took into account at that time the knowledge we had of what was the likely development distribution to be contained in the plan. Now further transport modelling will be undertaken on the preferred options which are being presented in the local plan review. They're very, very similar to what was originally modelled, but that modelling will provide a more accurate picture of exactly what the implications are likely to be for the mix of development that we're proposing. We're not anticipating that there will be any significant showstoppers from that, but I can't guarantee that until we've actually got that final transport modelling coming through. And again, that would be reported through to the members and decisions made on how we progress with that once that's received. Now, part of that local transport planning and the fact that it runs parallel with the local plan, our members were quite keen to make sure we do make as much opportunity for presenting modal shift and move into more active travel and sustainable modes of transport as much as possible, and also to look to try and bring forward the major development, particularly on a basis of one dwelling per employment space. And the discussions we've had, particularly for the East of Faversham, with the developers involved, that includes the Duchy themselves, they are looking at that very closely to promote that type of development. So it's more containing the transport movements that arise from those developments itself. Now, I could go on for this for ages, which I won't do. And I know Junction 7 on the M2 at Brindley Corner is at or very close to capacity as it stands at the moment, and is actually a major constraint not only for Swale but for Canterbury and Dover as well, for any new development that comes forward. And moving to the Reg 19 consultation, we've had quite significant discussions both with KCC Highways and Highways England with regard to the junction. There is what's called a RIS bid currently in place, which is looking at the design and feasibility for making significant improvements to Junction 7 itself. And that will feed through to further bidding through government funding for the actual improvement to Junction 7 itself. Now that RIS 3 programme is looking at 2025 to 2031, I think. I may just need to double check on the time period, but I believe that's what it's for. So we would be looking for M2 Junction 7 improvements to come forward quite early within that programme. And there are discussions taking place with Highways England and with KCC. And KCC and the Local Economic Partnership have identified M2 Junction 7 as the priority almost within the county to come forward. So there's lots of pressure to bring forward that scheme early. Come what may, the developers have to put forward mitigation on Junction 7 anyway to mitigate the needs generated by their development itself. They will need to make quite significant financial contributions to improvements to M2 Junction 7. And they could well have constraints on them in terms of how much development they can bring forward, either in advance or as part of the programme for improving M2 Junction 7 itself. I hope I've been, you can understand what I was saying there. Apologies if it got a bit complex.
Thank you, James. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
And the points then on housing needs and affordable housing.
I could speak on this for about, this is a subject on its own for about 2 hours as well. As I've mentioned, we took a review of the local plan. There were many concerns that parts of the borough, particularly on the island, weren't getting any affordable housing whatsoever because of the viability issues. So we brought in specialist consultants to look at the viability of the local plan, and they've produced evidence which is supporting a 30% affordable housing provision for the Faversham area itself, and looking for a distribution of that. I haven't got the policy in front of me as it stands at the moment, but from what I remember, it's looking at sort of 70% intermediate housing, so that's affordable rent and shared equity housing. But there is a certain amount of social housing which would be expected as part of that provision as well. But those discussions will take place very closely with our housing teams and with the affordable housing providers to make sure we get the right mix that's required for the developments coming forward. It's not just about affordable housing, I have to say as well. I think it's the mix of housing that's important to meet the needs of the community. So it's making sure you do get the elderly provision. And there's also other forms of housing to meet certain needs as well. And also to get the mix of housing to get deliverability. So you do get some houses which are built in a different form more quickly to meet the needs that are required. So that's all part of the mix that's coming forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, we next have questions from, and again, I think it's best to take these in two at a time so that we can work through them. Firstly from Ray Churnside, and secondly from Andrew Cullum. So if you could ask Ray to come forward.
So could Ray Churnside come with your question first?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
My question builds on question number one, really, but widens the question from roads to all aspects of infrastructure. The question is, can we be assured that all necessary infrastructure, roads, schools, GP surgeries, water, sewage, all forms of infrastructure will be completed and up and running before houses are completed, not after? Thank you.
Thank you. And
the second question from
Andy Cullen, could you come in with your question? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I think what I'd like to say is my primary concern is actually the amount of housing that's proposed for Faversham. One of my probably questions here is, with the sense of the regulations here, you've got 18, which would normally give the residents option goes onto a plan. Instead, all they've got to do is really all they can vote on is sort of as such as they can talk about the soundness or legality of it, and they don't seem to have that opportunity, which I think really hasn't left it doesn't very meaningful for them to have that chance to have their say. And I think my second question I'd like to ask here is that this seems to be hinging on the Brenley corner. Now, obviously, what I'd like to, the point of view with that, if that doesn't go ahead, I would like to know what the plan B is in that case, really. Okay, thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. James, are you able to speak?
James, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, it just takes me time to find the on switch.
Fine.
Right, infrastructure. Now, I think when you look through the local plan review documents, obviously look at the policy, because that does set out some of the infrastructure requirements actually set out in the policy itself. But also attached to the local plan documentation is an infrastructure delivery plan, which gives you a more detailed content of what's expected to come forward as part of the plan period for the development in Faversham as a whole, never mind just the east of Faversham itself. The idea sometimes that some of the infrastructure can come forward before any of the housing is not realistic. Now, if you're putting a secondary school in or even a primary school in, you need kids to fill the school. So it's unlikely that Kent County Council would want to have a school which isn't full of kids. So they program in the school as part of the development as a phased approach. Now, I can't tell you at what point that phasing would happen yet, because that's all part of the planning application process and in negotiation with Kent County Council as the main education provider. Now, that's similar with other forms of infrastructure at the same time. So you'll see it phased during the course of the development as and when the needs of the development actually requires that bit of infrastructure to be put in place. Now, there are some bits of the infrastructure you would expect to be upfront. A lot of it would relate to sort of the ecology, would relate to the landscaping. And as you know, landscaping can take many years anyway to sort of get to full bloom or to full effect in terms of its impact. So that's usually programmed in as part of that at the same time. Now, with regard to Brindley Corner, as I said, there are these discussions taking place. It's often quite difficult with the way in which government provides for central government funding for major infrastructure projects, particularly on the strategic highway network, to get them to sort of dedicate their finances more than 5 years ahead. So you're always working on the basis of their planning to move to that direction, and we'll be making decisions to do so. The only confidence I can give you is the fact that it is a high priority has been set by Kent County Council and with the local economic partnership, as well as the Borough Council. And there is significant pressure being put on the government and Highways England to bring forward those proposals. Now, part of that has been successful on the fact that we're having a feasibility study undertaken for the M2 Junction 7 improvements. There is further pressure being put on even to take it out of the RIS bidding and just get the government to accept that M2 Junction 7 is so important, not just for Swale, but it's also important for Canterbury and Dover, as I mentioned before. And there are key issues, obviously, with Dover Port and the connections in with Dover Port, which is giving the government a bit more focus on concentrating their ideas for bringing forward proposals for M2 Junction 7. Now, if there is delay in bringing forward M2 Junction 7, that will cause a delay in bringing forward the delivery on sites east of Faversham, not necessarily stopping it altogether, but may slow it down quite considerably. Now, if that's the case, as a local planning authority, we'll need to review that position. The problem we've got in Swale, I'm getting quite technical now, almost anywhere where you put development in Swale trickles down onto the M2 and the M2. You can't stop it from doing so. So it's always going to have any development where you put it anywhere has constraints, whether it's at M2 Junction 7, M2 Junction 5, or along the A2. So those constraints will always be there. And I suspect we would have a strong argument at that point if M2 Junction 7 wasn't coming forward as quickly as we thought it could do, that we'd be looking for a stepped approach towards the housing provision, and we would slow down the amount of housing in the early part of the plan period and possibly then speed up once those key bits of infrastructure are put in place. And that may be from 2030 onwards rather than 2026 onwards, for example. But again, those are the discussions which are taking place with the government.
Thank you
very much, James. The next two questions are from Chris Taylor and Jules Heptonstall. Jules, I just want to sort of confirm you may be using somebody else's account because you're coming up as a different name here, but we can obviously see you're registered as a Faversham voter. Just wanted to check check that. But Chris Taylor first.
Right, Chris Taylor, if you could come in with your question.
Well, thank you. My question really is about the credibility of the whole plan. I found 2 examples, and that was very quickly. One is the plan states very clearly that it is imperative, that's the word they use, that no new retail is allowed outside of Faversham that would jeopardize businesses, the high street of Faversham. And quite frankly, they've just allowed Aldi, and they are viciously competing against the high street, trying to tell everybody they'll get 30% better shop if they go to them than Tesco's. That's the first thing I would say is questions credibility. How, if they couldn't stop at Aldi, how can we know they won't stop others? Second thing is on the strategic housing land availability assessment, I found examples of the assessment saying various places are totally unsuitable, yet they have now been included in the plan. How does land suddenly become suitable when it was unsuitable? So it's all really about credibility.
Thank you. And then Jules Heppenster, are you able to come in now?
Hi, I'm using my other half Zoom, which is why it says Mark.
Yeah.
We are new to Faversham and we moved here in August. And unfortunately, due to lockdown, we haven't been able to experience a lot of the community yet. But I actually really echo what Chris is asking in terms of how are these plans going to keep people in the town centre and keep local businesses and local trade still with jobs rather than drawing it out to big supermarkets.
Thank you and welcome to Faversham.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jules.
It's James going to answer that one.
I'll do my best again. Right, on the retail side of things, again, I advise you, if you look on the evidence base that supports the local plan, there's retail studies in there and look at the evidence that's bringing forward. Now, I think what's critical, there's different types of retail. There's convenience retail, which are the Aldis of this world, and then there's comparative retail, which is your normal A1 units you would expect to see in town centres, etc. Even within that context, you have local shopping as against wider scale shopping, which has a wider catchment area. So you've got to look at it within that context. And you would always expect any new development to provide for the local needs. So if somebody needs to go and shop for their loaf of bread or their cucumber or something, they can nip to the local shop just down the road. And you would expect that in any of the new development and neighbourhoods that may be brought forward. But in terms of your comparative shopping, you wouldn't expect to see any significant competition occurring outside Faversham town centre area itself, because it's quite important that we do keep the vitality and viability of Faversham town centre right up front, and that is protected. Convenient shopping, the Aldis of this world, is more difficult. The government aren't constraining that development so much in terms of town centre or adjacent to town centres. You go through a sequential test through the local plan, through the planning process, and that's where our policies are slightly constrained. So hence you do see some convenient shopping coming forward, the Aldis of this world, etc. But even there are constraints that they don't start taking away from the attraction of Faversham town centre itself, and retail impact assessments are part of that process. I'm not probably giving you a proper answer to that because it's you need to look at the evidence. Now, with regard to the SLA and the words where, if you look in the SLA, you will see the words suitable and unsuitable. The SLA in effect is sort of a high level assessment of sites promoted for development. It's assessed against criteria which are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, local plans should aim to sort of look for development of land which is of the least quality or the least special in terms of the environment. The problem we've got with Swale, about 60% of the borough is subject to very high level constraints. Now, whether that's area of outstanding natural beauty, flooding, coastal change, conservation areas, international designated sites, etc. And there's lots of SSIs and so forth. So there's a hell of a lot of constraints out there. We're quite constrained where we can put development. Now we've exhausted through the local plan what I believe are the brownfield sites available within Faversham and Sittingbourne and elsewhere. There's not much more that we can bring forward. If you do find something, please tell us and we'll look at it. But we think we've exhausted that. There's not much left there on that basis. So we do have to go for greenfield. And it does get quite difficult in the choices you have to make. And local designations, we often have to make compromises there. And that includes whether it's the best and most versatile agricultural land or not, because that's not a nationally protected designation. So there are those difficult choices, and I understand the concerns that many of you have that we've had to make those difficult choices. And some of those have been sites which have been classed as unsuitable coming forward. But there are mitigation that can overcome those concerns, we believe.
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Madam Mayor, we now have questions from Matthew Hatchwell and Harold Goodwin.
So Matthew Hatchwell, could you come in with your question? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor, and thanks to the Swale Borough Council team for putting together what broadly I think is a really progressive plan. I wanted to ask about two areas, specific areas that are beyond the council's mandate for action, a little bit like setting housing quotas. And those are air quality and water abstraction in relation to maintaining water levels in chalk streams like the Westbrook. But because those areas are beyond the council's remit, the draft local plan doesn't seem very ambitious in those areas. And I wonder if there's anything that can be done to kind of beef up that language. I see that David Walton is going to ask a question in a few minutes about the A2 at Ospringe on air quality. And you know, that's an area where there's really a lot of concern in the community right now, I think. And I just wonder if there's more, there are more active verbs that we can use in the local plan to address those problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Harold Goodwin, could you ask your question?
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. I wanted to ask two very quickly, if I may. But first of all, to say that I'm very pleased that most of the housing development is to the east and not to the west. That will reduce traffic pressure to some degree. The two specific questions are two large sites still in Faversham owned by KCC, Kiln and Osborne Courts. The Faversham Community Land Trust feel these sites would be ideal for really affordable housing for the people of the town. And by that, I mean genuinely affordable, not the 80% figure that the government insists on. And I'd like to ask Swale Borough Council to support the Faversham Community Land Trust in taking this proposal forward to KCC and pushing it as hard as we can. The other question is probably a briefer answer, James, which is if the Highstead Park development is pushed through and approved, will the allocations across Swale be revised?
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. James.
Okay. Air quality is a local plan issue. It is a planning policy issue. So it's not outside the bounds of planning. You've got to look at it in coordination with the council's role as an environmental health authority as well. So lying behind any development that would take place, the council have already designated, I might not get the terminology right because I'm not an air quality specialist, but air quality management action areas. And Ospringe is obviously one of those, which is high up on that list. They are required to be put in place where there's exceedances above the air quality objectives set by central government.
Yeah.
So there's a ceiling of 40 whatevers on nitrous oxides and things of that nature, which you're not allowed to exceed. And the planning system has to take that into account. So we can't bring forward development which would bring about any exceedances above those air quality objectives. And that's quite a key element of the plan. And we've modelled the air quality impacts of the local plan, and you'll find that evidence base again on our website attached to the local plan documentation. So please look at that, and that's been drafted wholly with our environmental protection team and the air quality specialists that we have, and obviously with our transport modelers to make sure that is the case. Now,
sorry, James, just to add to what James has said, obviously the borough has got a number of air quality management areas, AQMAs, and we monitor those very carefully. We've also declared a climate emergency, and we know that air quality and getting better air quality is absolutely essential, and planning is just part of that. So the other things that we have to look at is, and this is part of the plan, the numbers of properties that we're building that are near public transport, so railway stations, so the Tenham area of opportunity, the properties in Selling or Neames Forstall, they are to enable people to be able to use the train. But actually the local plan can't do this by itself, and that's why we work really closely with our colleagues who are doing the AQMA, and really we need to work with the town and everyone else to really have cleaner vehicles, cleaner cars. We've got anti-idling policies to overall improve the air quality. But you're absolutely right, we do have to be completely robust in our ambition, because, you know, I went to Ospringe School way too many years ago, and I could cycle and very happily sit on the A2, you know, cycling down, and it wasn't as bad then. Now, I don't think it would be a particularly pleasant experience. So we are trying to do something wider than just through the local plan, but actually it is a big part of the local plan as well. Sorry, James, continue.
Thank you, Larissa. Just to say, obviously, the discussions we're having with the developers is looking at that A2 corridor bit particularly, and it's no, air quality does go with congestion problems. There is a correlation between the two, and they will be looking to calm that traffic down along that A2 section through Faversham, particularly leading right on to Ospringe. So you'll see as part of their proposals how they're going to bring forward that type of approach, which would co-join with the work that the council's doing as a totality across the borough in terms of low emission zones, and whether I got the terminology right, and things of that nature.
Thank you. Yeah.
Highstead Park was mentioned. That is obviously being promoted by a developer. It's not something the council has looked favourably on, and doesn't feel it should be part of the development plan process. I'm sure they will challenge the council as we move forward with the local plan, and indeed you may see planning applications coming forward accordingly, and we will handle those applications appropriately according to the local plan policy we have at that time. I can't really comment more than that.
I understand that, but could I just clarify what would happen if they were to win on appeal? Because we've seen that happen before in Faversham, and what you would then do with the local plan. Would that effectively be a way in which we would get 10,000 additional houses in Swale to that the government is already requiring us to take?
I'm not sure I can answer that, Harold. That's something I would not know. As far as I'm concerned, it's such of a scale of development, it should be through the local plan processes that those decisions are made. Now, I can't say how a planning inspector would view having such a major scheme, and it's not just Highstead Park. We've got one or two other proposals elsewhere around the borough of a significant scale, larger than east of Faversham, being brought forward, and they will test the system accordingly. That's how developers work. How the planning inspectorate and the Secretary of State makes those decisions when it comes to appeals and so forth. Obviously, the council will defend its position and has a local plan where it is meeting its identified housing needs. That's what we have identified. So we are meeting that 1,038 dwellings per annum. And as long as we can justify the allocations coming forward meeting that need, I believe that protects the council very much so in being able to defend our position on appeal.
I don't wish to speak for the councillors on this call, but I am relatively certain that in the event that a planning appeal gave way to any development that gave an extra, large number of houses, let's say for argument's sake 10,000 houses, I'm certain that the councillors would be pushing us very much to write with urgency to say that it is not an extra 10,000 in addition to our allocation, that 10,000 de facto would become our allocation. As I say, I don't wish to speak for the councillors, but I am fairly certain that our MPs and our councillors would not want an additional 10,000 properties. So we would be in very urgent talks with the government should that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you, James, on that question. Just conscious that we had another question from Mr. Goodwin around KCC owned properties at Kiln and Osborne Court, and I think the question was actually as a proxy for somebody else for the Faversham Community Land Trust, and we're asking for Swale Borough Council support in the Faversham Community Land Trust taking those areas forward. Is there anything you can say on those?
If it's helpful, Councillor Barker, I'll go in there as Cabinet Member for Housing at Swale.
Thank you.
As Harold is aware, and please excuse the camera, I'm on my normal laptop, which has a fault on it. We are already working in the Housing Department with Faversham Community Land Trust in terms of both grants and support with officers, and that support will continue.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
I think an aligned question next, then, I think having answered both Matthew Hatchell and Harold Goodwin's questions, is from Sue Ackhurst, and perhaps to give the officers at Swale Borough Council a break, perhaps John Irwin can take and answer this question, but Sue, I think you're next.
Sue Ackhurst, could you come in with your question, please?
Thank you very much. Thanks all of you for holding this meeting. I do completely support what Harold Goodwin has said about that land, because of the way that land came into the possession of Kent County Council. I think it's particularly important that it should continue with the community interest.
Yes.
But as that question has now been asked by somebody else, by Harold, I'd like to ask another question. We can look at this increase in housing, which is over quite a long period of time, in a favourable manner, and think that it will bring back life to Faversham Town Centre and our poor traders who've had a really hard time over the last year. But parking is going to become an increasingly important issue for us, as it is when things are really active in the town centre. Every parking space is taken in not just the car parks, but in many roads around. And we're going to have a lot more people, I hope, coming into work and coming into shop and coming in for leisure and other purposes. And I think we need to think very seriously. And forgive me, I haven't actually read 1,000 pages of the plan, so it could be that quite a lot is already said there about parking, but I think that's a really serious issue. And also about parking, we know that in various country roads that are close to Brenley Corner, we get a lot of people parking all along the A251, along Homestall Lane, along the roads around, the roads to Selling and so on. We get a lot of people who do car shares travelling to London. And I think it should be a real consideration, particularly the Duchy of Cornwall land close to Brenley Corner, where some of it's going to be industrial. Serious consideration to be given to having a car parking area there, and elsewhere if it could be fitted in, perhaps near to Junction 6 as well as Junction 7, where cars can legally park, so that we stop having all these cars parking in the mud on the country lanes. So it's just parking issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you.
I don't think that's probably appropriate for Councillor Irwin, actually. Now we've moved on from the Faversham Community Land Trust. James or Larissa, is there anything you could add or respond to on the issue of parking?
I think when you're looking at new development and the planning of towns, especially as we move forward, you've got to first take into account alternative forms of access. So you're almost taking the car out of the equation. How do we maximise access to these developments and to Faversham Town Centre by other means than the car? So you're always trying to reduce down the impact of the car. You know, you've got congestion issues, you've got the air quality issues, etc., etc., etc. We need to do something about it. And I think what the councillors have done with this plan is put that to the forefront of policy now. And that's very much being promoted, that we go down that route. Now, having said all that, now at the end of the day, there will be a certain amount of vehicular traffic which will need to access Faversham Town Centre and elsewhere. And you will need to meet those needs with the growing vehicular use. And that's something that needs to be looked at. Now, you've got to then distinguish between what is public parking and what is development related, almost private parking, whether it's private residential parking or private commercial parking. They're different animals. And I think that's where you need to work with the public authorities, including Swale Borough Council, who runs a lot of public car parks, to make sure there is sufficient capacity within those towns to meet those needs. But as I say, I think it should be the offshoot. We've got Alistair Gould here, Councillor Gould. He'd be able to explain this better than I can, because this is part of his specialist area. But we should be looking to maximise other forms of access as the first means, and we should be promoting that and making sure that that takes hold, and not just allowing free access by the car.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Could you just add in about the car parking for the people who are doing car shares and commuting? Would you mind just adding in that part, please?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you, and thank you for your comments, Sue.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm conscious that there are a number of people waiting on the list for a while, and we haven't forgotten you, David, Janice, Kieran, and Tim. So please do hold on. We will be getting to your questions shortly. I think Councillor Hook wanted to potentially say a few words on Osborne and Kiln Court, and I have a follow-up question for one of the earlier questions that I don't think was fully answered, which you might want to have a go at. So, Councillor Hook, if you could.
Yeah. Councillor Hook, would you come in now with your?
Thanks, Alison. I just wanted to come in on the specific point because I had some information on the very important topic of Kiln Court and Osborne Court, because I, as a member of KCC, you get to table up to one question if you want to per county council, and it was the full county council 10 times a year. In July, I tabled a question on Kiln and Osborne Court, and the question I put was whether the county council would agree to assign it to the community here in Faversham, because these are two big buildings that are laying effectively unused and have done for several years. The answer from the cabinet, the administration at KCC at that time in July, was no, they want to achieve a financial return for the council. I then had an opportunity to raise it in the committee, which was in October, and that produced more information. I got back from that an email on the 8th of October, which I've just shared with Harold, which was from a KCC officer saying they were looking at feasibility and marketing and different options for it, but they had, because of the comments that I'd raised in July about it being vandalised, they put guardians, which are people to live in one of the buildings and protect it from vandalism. I think that's still not perfect. I haven't heard any more since the October email about that feasibility and marketing exercise. So I've sent an email now to that officer to ask for an update on that, because the timescale he gave then was months, and obviously October is some months ago. So as soon as I get any more information, I'll share that with the Community Land Trust.
That's great.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. I just wanted to follow up, James, if I can, on an earlier question. One of the earlier residents felt that one of their questions wasn't fully answered. And I think I've heard, because I've been to a few of these meetings now for other parishes, I think I've heard an answer to this question before, but it would be worth repeating for this audience. And the question was, why was Regulation 18B skipped, as it allows residents opportunities to comment on housing allocation? And I felt that, I don't know, Larissa, if you or James could answer that question.
So if I start and then James can come in. The council undertook a Regulation 18 consultation, which had one of the largest responses to a consultation of that sort. Now, the way that the Regulation 18 asked a number of questions, asked for, you know, how people think that development should happen, and that was either in kind of a single settlement or different settlements across the area. And we got an awful lot of information from that. Now, to go out to another Reg 18 consultation, something, you know, we'd have to be certain that we were going to get something that we didn't already have. And what we already had was that amount of information. So we spoke to external planning advisors who advised that we didn't have to go out to another Reg 18 consultation, and actually we had enough, and we'd done enough, and we had enough information, and enough of what we were going out with was still relevant, that we could go straight to the Reg 19 consultation. So James, have you got anything technical? So that's kind of the layman's term. Have you got anything technical to add?
Well, the only other issue was expediency to a certain extent, because as I mentioned earlier, plans that are more than 5 years old or are dealt with by government as being out of date.
Yeah.
And you're more prone to then having ad hoc planning applications and decisions being made against you. And as I said, that date in early April 22, around about, I think it's March or April time, is quite critical. And the longer you leave it after that April 22 date, the plan becomes less and less robust and more prone. So that, you know, if you did another Reg 18 consultation, that would add an extra 9 to 12 months onto the programme.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. We now have a question from David Walton and then a Janice Kelly.
Thank you. David Walton, could you come in with your question?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. My question was about the A2 Ospringe in particular, the high level of traffic at peak times, and therefore the high level of pollution that comes with that. It seems to me that we've already answered that question to some extent, in that there's nothing really in place. It's a long-term process. However, this is a short-term problem. I was out today, I filmed the other day on Friday, and HGVs were mounting the pavement at the narrow section while people were waiting at the crossing, children and adults, to go to the school. I see this on a regular basis. There doesn't seem to be any sort of thinking, long-term thinking or short-term thinking about dealing with this problem. So what I wanted to do is to point out that I've been in touch with GIST, which is obviously a major user of the A2 from 3 o'clock in the morning when they wake me up until 11 o'clock at night when I fall asleep. They are very, very open to discussion with the Borough Council, with Faversham Town Council and the Kent County Council. But nobody has actually bothered to ring them up to see what they feel about the local plan and what they feel about the nature of traffic on the A2 and how this may affect their business. They're very keen to move, if possible, to a better site within Faversham. They don't want to leave this area or within Swale, but nobody in the councils have appeared to speak to them. And I just rang them up on the off chance, and I was able to have a long conversation with the general manager. So what I want to know is how broad was our scope for setting out the local plan, and why did we not include the major players such as GIST in making our decisions?
Thank you. And I think Janice is our next question.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. I was trying to get the camera to come up, but for some reason it's not working. So, okay. Thank you, and good evening to everyone. I appreciate the comment that was raised earlier when you've got to complete the building of houses before you can then look at, okay, when do we build the schools, etc. But unless I've missed it, I didn't hear any sort of time frame regarding that. So once the houses are completed, when do the buildings of the school, etc., come along? And the thing I was quite shocked about is, I know there's COVID on at the moment and health services under extreme pressure. But even before that, the medical centres are overwhelmed with patients. And yet the house building continues. The houses are getting filled up with people, with population. And I think it's just going to put a massive strain on the 2 health centres that are there already. So I was just absolutely shocked about no GP surgery is going to be built. And I've lived here all my life. I was born in Faversham, so obviously I care passionately about the town and what's going on. So I'm just wondering sort of views on that, really. Basically, why there's not going to be another GP surgery, and how long after houses are built will these other things come online, like the schools, etc.
Thank you, Jenny. So just on that last point, and before James and Larissa answer that, and sorry, David, we will obviously answer your questions as well. I think the council have been in discussions with Swale about this as well. We had the same questions in reading of the draft plan ourselves, and it isn't the responsibility of Swale Borough Council to build the surgeries. And I know that they've been in constant consultation with the clinical commissioning group, whose responsibility it is. And I think they've undertaken the relevant surveys to understand the numbers of doctors required to support the volume of residents, and are keeping a close eye on it. But James, I'm probably speaking for you there, and obviously not forgetting David's question.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Just on the GP, I'll go to the GP one first. When you prepare a local plan, we have to engage with all the statutory agencies, and the health authorities are the ones that we talk to, and they were quite adamant that they didn't want a new GP surgery. What they want is financial contributions to expand the existing GP surgeries. Yeah. I can't do anything about that. As a planner, that's what I've got a plan for. I can't put in a proposal for a new GP surgery when the health agencies and authorities don't want that to be provided for. So we have to take their advice seriously, and that's they know what the development is being proposed. That's what their advice is to us, and hence that's what's been included in the plan. But there will be significant major contributions in terms of costs towards the expansion of the existing surgeries within the Faversham area to meet the needs generated by that development itself. With regard to schools, as I say, there will be certain triggers through the development of the sites at South East Faversham, which you would expect the land to be made available, to be made serviceable, and then for the schools to be built, and then for the schools to fill with the children. That's normal with any development. You can see that in many of the Section 106 agreements we've signed elsewhere for large-scale development elsewhere within the borough, and particularly around Sittingbourne over the last few years, where we've had quite major applications which have been approved. With regard to, I couldn't tell you whether I've not had any discussions with the general manager at GIST, and so apologies for that if I've not done that, but we rely on an economic development team and through our own consultation processes with the business community to get as much information as we can from them, and having that engagement with them. It may just so happen we didn't have that connection with GIST. I couldn't tell you whether our economic development team did or not, but please send me his contact details. It's fantastic he wants to engage with us, and I'm more than happy then to sort of contact him and have those discussions with him. I'm also aware that the Duchy have been in discussions with some of the transport operators on the western side of Faversham to see whether there could be some movement and transferal of their operations over to their site closer to the M2 junctions and removing that HGV traffic through there. But that's some of those transport operators have invested a hell of a lot of monies into the site that they've got, and they are big employers for Faversham as well. So you've got to be very careful how you manage that process at the same time, because you don't want to lose jobs, which are quite critical for the local economy at the same time. But there are those discussions taking place.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. I think we might have missed another part of a question before as well, James. So Matthew Hatchwell asked a question which related to both care, which you answered very clearly, I think. But the second part of this question, which I think we might have skipped over, was about water abstraction and water levels in chalk streams in the Westbrook. And I think that the question was really, can the local plan be more ambitious in relating to both air quality and water abstraction, and commit the council to working with others and pressure KCC and central government, the Environment Agency, for positive change? Is that something that the local plan can commit to and try and be ambitious around?
Within reason, that it's quite interesting, I think, with the water providers and waste treatment providers, etc. They've got their own legislation they need to comply with, and they are private companies generally, so they don't fit in with the Section 106 system. They are supposed to provide the infrastructure required to meet the development needs of anywhere within the country, and that's their responsibility and duty as a private company. They produce 5-year rolling programs to ensure they do provide the necessary infrastructure to protect water sources all at the same time. So it is sort of partly outside the planning system that's enforced. But when you get such a major scale of development, you sometimes do need that one bit of kit, one bit of infrastructure, which a major development provides. And as I said, that will be required as part of the East of Faversham development.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, we've got two more questions. The first from Kieran Jennings and the second from Tim Stoner.
So Kieran Jennings, could you come in first, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Two very quickly. One is to sort of come back to the question of the A2. I didn't see anything, and I similarly haven't gone through all 1,000 pages, but I didn't see anything in the plan about how you're going to get all these people who are living on the other side of the A2, the south side of the A2, to commute over the A2. I mean, at the moment, there's one footbridge which is not very accessible to people who have mobility disabilities, and I think that's going to be a massive problem if you're expecting both people to come into the town and if you're going to sort of deal with issues of congestion. I mean, also part of that is, what do you do with the junction with the Ashford Road, which is at the end of my road? I live in Preston Grove, and currently that's going to be turned, I believe, into a 3-way traffic lights system. Now, whenever we've had temporary lights in there, it's led to tailbacks all the way along the A2. So I'm very nervous that that's going to create a problem in and of itself anyway, and you're going to effectively, I think, I sort of worked out, you're nearly doubling the population of the town potentially. So that is going to lead to more congestion, I sort of believe. So I would like to see some more thought go into how you're going to allow people to move freely across the A2 and safely across the A2 and accessibly across the A2. And then the second thing, really picking up on the climate emergency point, is are there any requirements on the new housing to be at least carbon neutral, or have made measures to be far more less in carbon intensive than most construction tends to be? I work with construction businesses. It might surprise people to know that cement produces more carbon than the air industry, than aircraft. So, you know, it is carbon intensive building housing. Are they at least doing things like putting in solar panels, ground source or air source heat pumps, and other, you know, other sort of measures to reduce the amount of carbon intensity in the building project?
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Tim Stoner, could you come in with your question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, James. Nice to see you. I have a question again about the A2. And I think the A2 is important for Faversham because although it's a street running past the southern edge of the town, it's soon going to become one of the streets running through the centre of the town as it's grown to the south. And that means that it has to carry a lot of movement of people. And the choice is, are they going to be in cars or are they going to be walking and cycling like they are already in the centre of Faversham? I was pleased to hear you say that authorities would be looking to calm flows along the A2. But I was in a meeting with a KCC officer last week about the Ashford Road junction, and they said the opposite. And what they said was that they're trying to increase the capacity of the A2, and that's what the design of the Ashford Road junction is all about. They're not planning, they said, for the modal shift that you also mentioned. They haven't been thinking about pedestrians and cyclists. And what they said was that they wouldn't be doing so until the political will changes. And they were, as officers, responding to their political direction at KCC. And so in the absence of that political will, the lack of a vision for the entire length of the A2 meant that they didn't have the confidence that it was worth proceeding on a piecemeal basis, because they said, well, we could do more for pedestrians here, do more for cyclists here, but if that isn't going to happen further upstream and downstream, what's the point? And so I've got two questions. First, do you have the confidence that the political will is there or might soon be there? And would you support a plan for Watling Street, the historic name for the A2, from, say, the western link to the west of the town, right through to Brenley Corner? And that vision would be about the necessary modal shift that has to happen if we're going to achieve the climate reduction targets and respond to the climate emergency that Larissa, I was pleased to hear, had mentioned, as have KCC. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So if I answer is there the political will, and then again, I'll let James do the tough technical stuff. I believe there is the political will. I believe we've signed a climate declaration. I've been in meetings as a new chief executive with lots of councillors that have, without question, all talked about, and this is of all parties, to increase safe, active travel. I know that the work that we're doing as an organisation is very much around that. So I do believe there is a political will. Just with the question that you asked around, I think Kieran asked around ground source heat pumps and solar panels. Before I came here, I was working in Southend, where I was working with a number of organisations leading on a piece of work around how you get developments to truly embrace low carbon, affordable, low carbon energy. And what we realised very early on was you can't wait till the planning stage to do that, because once you get to the planning stage, there are costs and it's all very difficult. So one of the things that I think is essential that we do here is we talk to developers very, 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 very early on in the process. So as soon as they're telling us what they, where they think they might want to be, we start having those conversations then, because then it just becomes something that people do rather than something that our planners need to say, actually, we want you to do this. And what we found, and I'm not saying it's the same in Swale, but what I found in Southend was when we got to those conversations, they said, yep, you can have the ground source heat pumps, but we can't do the affordable housing. And there was so there is a piece of work that I was involved in that I'll share with colleagues as the time is right, which is around properly affordable low carbon heating, low carbon homes, around how you deliver that, because I think it is essential that in the same way that we really begun that shift to thinking about petrol and diesel cars not being a thing, we have to get to that point with other things like gas central heating that just become, and we're nowhere near there. So I think to your answer, yes, we absolutely, and we have signed a climate emergency declaration. We would not be doing our jobs if we didn't look at all of those things going forward, but they are in the medium term rather than this week or next. But I'm certain that there is the political support for things such as active travel, and I think that's demonstrated by the fact that the travel part has formed such a large part of where we're putting allocations. And then James can do the technical.
Thank you.
Just to add what Larissa said, one of the proudest things I've got with the local plan is I think we're at the cutting edge on zero carbon policy. So if you look at policy DM3 in the local plan review, not now, but when you get the chance to do so, it's at cutting edge. I don't think there's been any other shire district which has got anywhere near close the policy that we've included there. It's going to be quite challenging. We've had it totally viability tested by our consultants, and it's been costed as part of the local plan process. It's also been designed in such a way to be able to be flexed depending on what the government does with the building control regulations. Because it's in the consult, I think many of you would be aware of the building control consultation which took place last year, and they've not reported on it yet, although I think it's soon, where they are dictating to local planning authorities that you have to restrict certain policies. But we've flexed the policy to switch the emphasis over to other elements in terms of efficiency, heat efficiency and heat generation and so forth. So we're at the cutting edge, and I would suspect even many metropolitan authorities are not getting anywhere close the form of policy that we've got. So I would advise you to look at it and support that policy for us as much as you can. With regard to A2, that's and Tim, you're more of a specialist on this than I am. So I take that advice from you as a consultant on this to a large extent. And I'm a bit surprised with the comments you made with the meetings you've had with Kent County Council. They don't, I'm not familiar with that. The discussions I have with the officers I deal with are very different. They are very much promoting the approach that we're taking, and that's reflected in the local transport plan, which accompanies the local plan in terms of its drafting. It will need further work and further detail added to it as we move forward with the local plan to examination, and that's intended to take place, particularly when we've got the transport modelling to help us with that, because trip rates are the key thing in the transport modelling. And our members have insisted we have challenging trip rates to actually force people out of the car and to use alternative forms of access. And as far as I'm concerned, the A2 is a major block between the development south of the A2 and moving into Faversham. We need to get those key pedestrian cycle links in particularly, but also public transport links as well, to get that proper access, which doesn't require the car to be in there. And I know for definite the Duchy of Cornwall, that's how they're looking at it. And they are looking at some kind of A2 corridor study, working jointly with ourselves and with KCC to actually bring that forward. And you're at the cutting edge of this in terms of the consultancy work that you do, and I'm sure that that type of work will be involved. That's not my specialism, so but that's what I believe will be the case.
Thank you
very much, James. Very much appreciated. We've run out of public questions, and as councillors we have been holding back in the belief that it is better to listen and understand what our residents feel to help shape our own thinking. We have our own thinking, and we've now got questions coming from Faversham Town councillors. So Hannah if you would like to go next, and then Anthony.
Thank you. Thanks to Larissa and James for coming along this evening. I think it's been really useful. I just wanted to ask a question. I know I've had conversations about this previously with officers around the expansion of healthcare, because I do think it is really important, and it has been raised a number of times this evening. I fully understand that there's been quite in-depth consultation with both the CCGs and the ICPs, but what with them saying, you know, that they want a substantial addition to services in terms of expansion rather than additional services, is that a kind of fluid situation? Does that continue to happen? Is there consultation with local provision in terms of how they're coping with numbers? And what is the mechanism for us as a community and as a town council if we do find that, you know, waiting times are long, to be able to raise that as a concern?
Thank you, Hannah. Anthony, do you would like to raise your question?
Thanks, Chris. I mean, the very first thing I want to say is a big thank you to Larissa and James that they've come along, and I think I have found it, and I hope everyone has found it, a very informative meeting, and we've all learned quite a lot. And also thank you to fellow residents. There's been up to 70 people here at different points in the meeting, and the questions have been very informative too. I mean, my position is the big issue in this local plan is the housing proportions, and the proportion currently allocated to Faversham is too much, and this needs to come down. I thought the pie charts were really useful actually to see those percentages, but the point I'd make, and I'd ask James and his team to take away, is that those proportions of proposed new housing do not match up to the current proportions of population. So in the final of the pie chart, it was currently 28% of the new housing, which is the 7,000 plus the extra 10,000 the government's ordered. There's 28 of that in Faversham and 32 in Sittingbourne. So one could say, well, Sittingbourne's getting more than Faversham, but Sittingbourne starts off as a much bigger established town than Faversham is. So those percentages, in my view, are way out of kilter and out of proportion in that sense. So I think they need to be looked at. I think the point about needing more affordable housing needs to be answered, because equally, while many people are concerned about too much housing, there's also the point that Josh Rowland's made. And as a councillor, I get in my postbag letters from local families where you've got 3 generations, sometimes more than that, living in inadequate housing for young families starting out. Buying or even renting in Faversham is way too expensive. You're looking at £1,200 a month to rent, say, a 2-bedroom property in Faversham, and it's too much. We need properly affordable housing. The government imposing 10,000 more is completely ridiculous, and I want to try and understand better what options do we have to push back on that and get the government to withdraw that. The air quality is really important. Ospringe is 3 times the legal limit. Thanks, Chair. But it seems to me we can't have new housing that breaches an already legal limit. Thank you.
Thank you.
We could take those questions in turn, but I think Councillor Ben Martin, as representative of Swale Borough Council, would like to answer the question on housing. I'm happy whichever order we want to take them. Ben, if you want to answer the housing question first.
Yeah, I think there's a real ambitiousness to the policies that have been outlined in the local plan. I think that we have looked very carefully at what the needs are. There was a thought as to whether or not we could go higher in terms of proportion of affordable housing, but when we looked at that, it would have meant reducing the quality of that affordable housing. In terms of, would we get the Homes for Life standards? We probably wouldn't be able to do that. We've written that into our policy by going for 30%. We get Homes for Life standard, we get a set number of adapted properties for those who have additional needs. We actually get a good proportion of social, affordable rent and intermediate products, such as the government's new first time home scheme. I do find some of these intermediate products a little bit of a joke when they're described as affordable, but realistically, yeah, we have to do that by the law. but the affordable housing element in here has been really considered, and it has been done to ensure that we can actually deliver the affordable housing that is needed in the borough. It is a real priority, and in addition to what's in the policy, we're also working with community-led housing initiatives. So you've heard about Faversham Community Land Trust today. There's also Minster Housing Co-op. There's also a co-housing group that we're working with, and we actually have schemes in place to support those through our offices and through a grant scheme as well. In addition to that, we're also we're also setting up our own affordable housing company, or our own housing company that can develop both affordable and market sale properties should the need arise to subsidise. And that is starting out now. So we're doing an awful lot on the affordable housing front already, and this plan is there to assist and push that. And I also want to take the opportunity while I've got the mic just to thank Larissa and James for giving up their evening, because I think they've done a fantastic job tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Martin. I'm just conscious, James, it'd be great if you could answer Hannah's question, but we do plan to stop this meeting at 9 o'clock, and there are 2 more questions to come in. I think Councillor Alistair Gould would like to speak on behalf of Swale Borough Council and as a GP around the health matters, and I think Chris would like to speak about the environmental policies and the local plan. So I'd like to get those in. Assuming we run just over 9 o'clock, which I beg your patience for, I would like to say that the consultation is being run by Swale Borough Council, and everyone can make their views known to them, as Larissa and James did at the outset. And so don't feel free to continue the dialogue after 9 o'clock, either with us or with Swale Borough Council. So James, to answer Hannah's question first, quickly, if you may.
As I say, we're at a point of time when we had the discussions with the health authorities, agencies, in terms of what their requirements were, and that's set out in our infrastructure delivery plan. I have to say, as a planner, and I've been a planner for far too long now, I think, health has been one of the most difficult parts of the infrastructure element to deal with, because of the constant change to the health systems. Now, as a planner, you would like to have discussions with statutory agencies with a person who's going to be there for a certain amount of time. I'm almost finding on a 6-monthly basis, I'm talking to a different face and to a different part of the health authority almost. And it's very difficult to plan properly. And I have to say, it's only until recently really that the health authorities have got anywhere near their act together to engage on the Section 106 processes. They never did 10, 20 years ago, because I suspect they got such good government funding at that point for a short period of time, they didn't engage with the planning system. Now they're a bit more constrained with monies, that they are engaging. Whether they, it's like a change going on constantly in that process. Whether they turn around to us in 2 months' time and say they've got a different approach now and they do want to provide separate surgeries, then we would need to try and take that on board. The monetary value that we're getting from developers should equate to the needs generated by that development, whether that's in the form of money to allow for expansion of surgeries or for the cost of providing for a new GP surgery. It's just the land issue, because you would like to provide, within the allocation, land for GP surgery, and it could get to a point in a few years' time, once the master plan and they start developing out, it could be quite difficult to find that land for what they require if they do have a change of mind. But I can only plan for what they're telling me to do at this stage. I can't force them to do something they wouldn't want to take on board.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Just so two questions. Perhaps Alistair, you might want to go before Chris, on the basis that you might have something to add on the health questions.
Just that to reinforce the point, the CCG are, in fact, I had discussions with people in the CCG just this afternoon on this very issue, yeah, there are issues about how the funding gets from the NHS England to CCG, and but they are well aware of the issues, and I was able to to put it almost from both sides of the fence, both as a GP and a councillor, to the people in the CCG this afternoon about this. So they are aware of this, and have made very clear that to them the needs that there will be, and I think they will be engaging in the plan process some more.
Thank you very much. That's good. Last but definitely not least, Chris Williams, wherever you are. He says, desperately scouring his screen. There you are.
Thank you. I won't speak for very long, and mine's more of a statement rather than a question, really. So just to really sort of say that the town council, obviously we have a very sort of close alignment in terms of the climate and biodiversity sort of emergency. So we declared a climate emergency very close, a couple of years ago now, and a lot of the work within the local plan, there's particularly quite large sections on the natural landscape, biodiversity, active transport. They're very much worth a read for those that haven't, because there's obviously the difficulty of battling against central government and indeed the county councils, and it's been mentioned that obviously the political will in different authorities is very different, and the town and borough councils is very similar, which is good for Faversham, but it does make it more complex when you're thinking outside of that area. The connectivity between new developments and the current town centre is really important for biodiversity and for people. The more connectivity for people to active transport between these developments, it would obviously help air quality. And some of the work that can be done on a local level is to identify better walking and cycling routes, and the connectivity for biodiversity through green corridors, and it is really positive in the local plan to see that there is 2 strategic green corridors that sort of affect Faversham, which will help work in with some of the work that's being done already in the town. So really, I'm not really creating a question or anything really, but just to say that it's worth looking at the environmental policies within the local plan. I think it does provide some positivity and goes beyond what could be done, particularly what the government expects is very little compared to what the borough council are trying to do. So hopefully that will help answer some questions. But equally, as a town council, I'm very happy to, if anyone wants to send me anything, to ask any questions about what we're doing to help the town council as well.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, I think that's all the questions. I'd just like to thank everyone for taking part in positive spirit and putting their questions for what is frankly a very difficult and set of decisions that everyone's having to take. And as I suggested before, both the Swale Borough councillors and Faversham Town councillors are happy to engage up until the 30th, in which we make our submission. Madam Mayor, if there's any final words?
Councillor Barker, yes, could I just say, Larissa, I really didn't know you'd been born in Faversham and attended a junior school like myself. I was born here, stayed here, and clearly you are looking out for Faversham, which is very encouraging to know. And James, we've worked you very hard tonight, so thank you very much. But I think most of all, I want to thank our residents who clearly are passionate about this town and have come along this evening and engaged, and I hope you found it very useful. I think it's been brilliant, and what I really hope is that you have confidence in our councillors, as I do, and our team of professional volunteers who have total commitment to achieve the very best outcome for Faversham. So thank you all very much for coming, and what we want is the best for Faversham. So thank you.
Apologies, we've got a last question in.
Oh.
I think it's probably a little late now.
Jim?
I'll pass you on my details, and we can follow up with that.
Jim Holden, is it Holden?
We'll capture that later, Hannah. I'll send you my contact details, Hannah, directly.
Yeah. So thank you, obviously, particularly Swale Borough Council, Larissa. and James. It's been absolutely brilliant this evening. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.